Hello YouTube, this is Matt Pullin, and I said on the Greencastle Block Facebook blog earlier that I would post videos on a couple of games that I played last weekend at the US Amateur Team North tournament, where I scored a somewhat respectable 2.5 out of 5 playing on board 1 for the Chicago Chess Center team. And my opponent in this game that we're going to look at today was the first board for Lindenwood, and his name is Priyadharshan Kannappan, and it's a 2500 rated IM from India. And this game, we'll just go right into it, started, I was white, and it was a Sicilian chameleon variation with knight ge2. And he plays e5, which cuts out any d4 idea, but gives the d5 square right away, and white can jump into it with knight d5. And then knight ce7, the idea of this move, sort of a weird-looking retreat, but black is intending to trade off all of the knights. So we reinforce d5, and black exchanges, brings another knight to e7. Then bishop c4 to reinforce the d5 square, and then he trades there. And this, I must admit, is a position that I had no preparation for. I mean, it looks like a reasonable defense. There's a big hole in black's position, the d5 square. But given enough time, black should be able to challenge this bishop with d6 and bishop e6. So I don't think this hole leads to a huge advantage for white. Here, my opponent played a move which kind of mystified me, but now that I've done some study on this position, I understand the reason behind it. Black could play a move like d6. That looks very safe, but after queen f3, the threat of checkmate creates kind of an inconvenience for black. He'd like to be able to castle quickly, but he has to make a queen move in this position first. So he plays like queen e7 or queen c7, and then this queen comes over to b3, and only then will white, shut the door on his queen with pawn to d3 and finish developing his pieces. So again, this maneuver, queen f3 to b3, comes in, later in the analysis. And on b3, it's surprisingly hard for black to harass the white queen because there are no knights on the board. My opponent did not play d6. He played bishop e7. And I saw right away that bishop e7 allows white to win a pawn because of the the queen h5 hitting checkmate and also hitting e5. This is kind of an elementary beginner's tactic. But I mean, surely if he had some preparation. I mean, he didn't mention anything to me after the game or anything, but I was sure that he had preparation on this line, and it does sort of solve black's problems. I mean, it allows him to castle next move, and although white can win the e-pawn, black gains some time and development by attacking the queen, so is a reasonable gambit. I decided to take him up on it and play queen h5. Alternatively, white can play this slower with pawn to d3, and then say, castle and d6 and f4. So white can play for a small advantage this way as well, but probably not much. I play queen h5 here, and he castles, and to make any sense out of this move, I have to take on e5, and then d6. And here, it looks like a lot of queen moves, but the best plan in this position is actually to go back to g3 and then swing over to b3, because this is it helps out the bishop, so that when he plays bishop e6, I don't have to I don't have to let him take and double my pawns. And also on b3, the queen would hit on b7. So for instance, here's a sample line: queen g3, bishop e6, queen b3 to reinforce this bishop. So we're threatening to take on e6 actually, and also threatening to take here. And if black just exchanges bishops on d5, then after queen takes, it's very difficult to remove the white queen from d5. And keep in mind, white is up a pawn here. So queen d7 is probably going to be played here. And now white can go into this endgame with queen takes b7, where black exchanges, and then black hits the bishop, and then black does this exchange. And here, white's king sort of gets trapped in the center because black is threatening to take on b2, and also threatening to come here, check, and scoop up this pawn on d5. So this type of game, I mean, white is up 2 pawns, but one of them is surely going to fall. And white has no development to speak of. But he is up a pawn in this position. And if white doesn't want to go for that, his alternative is to play a4. I mean, he has other moves too, but I feel that white should respect the threat of black expanding with b5 and just play a4 himself to stop that. And this is a position where I don't think that black really has enough compensation for the pawn. But anyway, I had no understanding of this position, and I played queen f4, which is an altogether different plan that is not as good. Well, my idea is that this bishop is going to be exchanged for black's bishop, and so my remaining bishop is going to be on a dark square, so I would like my queen to be on the light square. And also on f3, the queen helps hang on to the d5 pawn. So here's how that shook out. Black challenged my bishop, and here I think Houdini likes me just to chop on e6 here, because in the game I played d3, and this exchange left me with a double pawn on d5, which turned out to be next to useless. So bishop f6, already this bishop is on a terrific diagonal, much better than its counterpart on c1. So I have to castle, otherwise rook e8 check will keep my king trapped in the center. So he played rook e8 anyway, and black's domination of the e-file, which is very difficult to contest, sort of marks, sort of marks the way he won this game. I just never was really able to solve the problem of the e-file. And I realized I didn't mention before that I lost this game, but oh well, spoiler alert. So yeah, queen g4. That looks like a weird move. That must be a computer move that I just threw in there. Queen a5, a3, rook a8, 7b1. Yeah, this looks reasonable. The problem is that this hanging pawn on b2 is very difficult to manage. Anyway, I played my queen to f3. This was, this was the square I intended to play it to all along. And I played queen a5, and again, I want to move my bishop and connect my rooks, but this pawn is a problem. So I played c3, and then he played queen back to b6. Now I can't move my bishop without dropping the b pawn because his queen is attacking it. And a4 is not very helpful because he just plays a5. And now I'm just giving the black queen another square that he can possibly use to get behind and penetrate into my position. So there's no I didn't see any way other than sacrificing a pawn to get activity, but Houdini likes of course Houdini likes queen d1, simply retreating the queen, and then after rook e5 wants to play c4. This c4 move sort of makes black's bishop on f6 the superior bishop for a very long time, but it does solidify the white pawn on d5. So this type of move, this c4 move, which I was reluctant to play at various points in the game, this was sort of my undoing. I should have played c4 and been strong on the light squares at the exchange of giving him this very great bishop on f6. So yeah, Houdini recommends c4 for me at various stages. but I just didn't want to play it because it sort of went against my positional sense. And here after rook a e8, bishop e3, just blocking the e file. And if black can't really take this pawn because then rook b1 and just grabbing this. So that was an alternate way to play. I instead tried to play in a riskier style with bishop f4, just giving up this pawn in order to try and get my bishop active and connect my rooks. So he chopped on b2, and I played rook a b1. Again, I'm not going to go over all of the Houdini recommendations in this video, but Houdini thinks that I should have taken on d6 here, and then after b6 played c4. Again, the c4 move was just never really in my mind, for the reasons that weakens the long diagonal significantly. Anyway, speeding up a little bit here, I played rook a b1, and then after queen takes a2, I should have followed through on my rook a b1 idea and chopped on b7. Houdini actually feels that white has an advantage here, but I underestimated this rook takes b7. I think I rejected it because of the queen a6 response. But actually after rook c7, this rook c6 threat is surprisingly hard to stop. For instance, if rook a c8, then just trades here. And then black really doesn't want to take with this rook because it gives up the control over the e file. If queen takes, then just takes here. So yes. So yeah, rook takes b7 was strong. Instead, I played bishop takes, which is a move I should have done initially instead of giving up my a2 pawn. So he played b6, and now my idea here was to give up some material to challenge the dark squares. So I played d4 in this position, which is completely wrong. I mean, this was my last chance to sort of bail out into a passive defense with c4. Again, this is a passed pawn, which white may be threatening to rapidly advance with bishop c7, d6, d7. It looks kind of frightening because black has a passed a pawn here, and he's got this bishop on the long diagonal, which controls the queening square of the pawn. But I mean, if he ever moves the a pawn, then his b6 pawn is dropping, and it might. I don't know. Here's the line that Houdini gives. Houdini feels that black should try and exchange the queens right away with queen e2, and takes in g4. Purpose of this move is to give the bishop a place to live on g3. So some other computer moves, and it feels that both sides should just repeat positions. So yeah, we really didn't learn anything from that line. Anyway, so d4 was played, and this move is just really poor, but I was just trying for some activity here, and I saw a way to remove his dark square bishop for my dark square bishop, which I thought would be in my favor. So he took here and then takes. And of course he didn't take back, because it's a doubled pawn and it's on a weak square. And I didn't think he would. If he did take on d4, Houdini feels it's good for white to play bishop c7 and just start the counterplay right away with the d pawn. I actually would have played rook b4, with the idea of maybe swinging the rook over this way. But this actually turns out to be not so good after just queen d2. So yeah, my opponent did not take that pawn, which I guess was fortunate. Rook, because I had no understanding of the position that followed. Anyway, rook a d8, activating his last piece. But the drawback of rook a d8 is his a pawn is without a defender. So I played rook a1, and he moved his queen, and I played bishop e5. Again, possibly losing a pawn, but forcing this exchange of bishops, which I felt would be to my benefit. So after bishop takes and d takes, this is a position that I grossly misevaluated. I mean, certainly white is going to lose both of these pawns. However, if I were to get one of these pawns back on the queen side and get my rook to a position behind his passed b pawn, I could possibly simplify into a rook endgame, which I could hold a draw. This was my plan, but it never really happened. My opponent just completely outclassed me in the heavy piece endgame that followed. So rook takes d5, which is in fact the strongest move. And the strength of rook takes d5 is that it threatens to take this pawn with the d rook. And taking with the d rook allows the queen to protect on f7, and also threatens to go down to the back rank. So it's a very strong move by my opponent. And I actually have a good move in this position, which I might be able to get a salvageable endgame, but I completely missed it. See, this was the sort of position where when I got here, I saw a move that might be better than the move I was planning, and I decided to play it because it was enticing. I had actually been planning on playing a different move in this position, and then there's a third option, which is actually best, that I didn't analyze at all. The move I was planning to before I got here was rook takes a7. My opponent actually pointed out that after d takes, he's threatening to play queen takes f1. Queen sack, and then check and mate on the back rank. So I would have to play something like g3, or maybe g4 would be better. But then rook e1, and again, threatening to, if I take, then rook takes, and then queen f1 mate. So I would have to protect this with my queen. And then, there are better moves for black, but he can probably win by just simplifying, taking on f1, and taking here, and bringing the rook behind the pawn. So I have to get my rook back here to blockade it, and then the kings come in, and this type of endgame is very difficult for white to hold because his pieces are so passive. And white could very well just run out of pawn moves on the queen side and have to, or on the king side, and have to give ground to black. But there are some drawing chances here. Certainly, it's better than what I played, but is pretty bleak. Once the rook gets behind the passed pawn, it's pretty bleak for white. Here. So that is rook takes a7. e6. e6 is actually a good move. The object of e6 is to sort of interrupt the queen's defense of f7. For instance, after f takes e6, there's rook takes a7. And now rook e5 it wouldn't protect the f7 square because there's a pawn in the way. And so black would actually be hard pressed to guard this and not make a concession. So actually best is to push past with f6. Rook takes is bad for the same reason. It's just, taking here, and there's no convenient way to guard the f7 square. So I don't know, say black plays something like this, and then rook a1. Clearly, black is better, but clearly white has some counterplay here. Again, so after e6, f6, just pushing past. And then rook takes a7, which is very similar to the line we just showed. In fact, it's just a straight transposition after rook takes e6, rook fa1. Again, this pawn on e5 is going to be lost anyway. And e6 is actually the best way to do it because it interrupts black's coordination, basically. Again, add that to the list of good moves I was not even close to seeing in this game. The move I played was fc1. I thought I had time to throw this in to force his queen to a worse square, but I underestimated his queen b5 move. Now, if his queen moves, then his queen has to stay on d5, right? And then possibly I'm just taking on a7 and threatening the f7 square because his queen would no longer be guarding f7. But he didn't take. He just played rook d takes e5. Again, I can't take the queen because then he would check and mate me on the back rank. He's got 2 pieces. I have 1 piece. So I have to take a time out to protect my back rank. Houdini feels h3 is the best move. I actually played g3, which is a straight-up blunder. Maybe g4 is also playable here. What happened in the game after g3 is he played queen b5. And I simply forgot that his queen on b5 is attacking that square. So I actually did play this in the game. I took on a7, which threatens to queen takes f7. And then he played rook e1 check, and I just resigned. Because whether I take it or not, his queen is going to come to f1 and give checkmate. So yeah, I mean, it's... I lost to a very elementary, Bobby Fischer teaches chess style back rank mate. But, I can't really complain about losing the chess game because of one tactic, because I just failed to correctly evaluate the position in all 3 stages of the game. So, I really wasn't that bothered by this loss. I mean, I was playing a very strong player, and I have a game that I could learn a lot from going forward. And the next time I get to that position in the opening, I'll definitely be better prepared for it. So yeah, that was my first round game at USAT last weekend against Priyadharshan Kannappan. And I hope you get something from this game too. Have a good one, YouTube.